My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. And we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a former Navy SEAL who conducted combat operations in Baghdad and Rhamadi. Upon leaving the service, my guest realized that once you've been in combat and are no longer in that world, nothing on the other side correlates to it. He also realized that there needs to be stepping stones to something else, because without them, that leads down a road of destruction. My guest put his mind and know-how to first saving the Monarch Butterfly, but he couldn't stop there. He's established an idea that will lead to healthier lives for not only veterans, but to anyone that is willing to learn. He's the CEO and founder of Guardian Grange, which is a humanitarian and environmental regeneration project to protect natural resources, strengthen communities, and facilitate veteran reintegration with a renewed sense of purpose. It's a pleasure to introduce Mark Matzeldelaflor. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, how you doing? Thank you. Lots going on, man. I just got back from a 4.5 hour drive from San Diego. So full benefit in the sun. We did a sweat lodge at Church of the People for Creator Mother Earth on the reservation down there, and had a good sweat and just feeling it, feeling the drive and all that.
Yeah. So we're going to get into that because I think there's a lot of alternative therapies with you and a lot of different ways to approach PTS and some things that come from being in combat, being in service, whether that be first responders, military, whatever. So we're going to get into that. But we always start out the show by talking about kind of your youth, what put you on this path to be in the military, what made you go down the road you're going, and not only into the military, but into special operations and into kind of the tip of the spear into combat.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like a good as place as any to start at the beginning, right? So I was always like out in the woods as a kid. Just that's where I like to be. I didn't really enjoy school that much. I enjoyed learning certain things, but I learned on my own, and the academic setting was not, not conducive to a little boy who wanted to just run around the woods. So I really valued that time. And as school kind of progressed and I was figuring out what am I going to do, going to go into society and live, go to college, go to the normal job route. I just started learning about the military. I knew obviously there was the Army, Marines, the basic branches, but I didn't really know much about any of it. So then I first heard about like Army Rangers. I'm like, oh, there's like this like more niched out group that does more specific missions and things like that. And then I started learning about Green Berets and Navy SEAL, these special operations. So I started just studying all of it, and eventually, chose Navy SEAL because that was like in all terrains, no matter what, small units, sneaky, and it was where I wanted to go as a calling. It was right up my alley. I'd rather be just as close as I could be to the woods and doing work like that. That's what got me to decide to join the Navy, as going for the special operator qualification, which at that time you still had to come in as a rate, like a gunner's mate or a normal like general Navy job, basically. In case you didn't make it, then you'd go back to there. And we did like an A school, and then we'd go to Buds and got to a team and deployed a couple times, did the TRADET thing, and yeah, that was kind of the broad strokes of that journey. I know we can talk more about specifics, but I'll leave it there for now.
Well, and of course, I don't want to talk about, through buds. People tell that story 100 times and stuff. The point that I want to make about it though is not only the buds in general, but having that mental toughness and looking at how your mental state is at the beginning of, your whole career that's in front of you, and then how's your physical state, and then as we kind of progress through your career and to now, I want to show the differences that you can tell in your body, that others can tell in your body, and just kind of show how no matter what you do or what you try to do, there's going to be those breakdowns, and you've always got to be ready to jump back in on it and kind of fix those as they come up, because they can tend to build up, and then you get way behind the power curve on it. So at the beginning of your career, how are you feeling? What's your outlook on this? You're going to be at the front of the global war on terror. So can we kind of talk about your mind state and physical state right off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, I was ready to go to the show at the end of the day. That's why I chose to go to the special operations community and SEALs, is to get the work done. So I was, um, 100% present and ready to go in. And as far as like physical state, I was running, right straight out of high school. So just doing your normal kind of training that one would do: push-ups, pull-ups, crunches, running, and just kind of doing a lot of that. We'd go to these dive motivators and get run through different programs when I actually got into the Navy and into the A school, really, because I only did that a couple times at boot camp, because they try to keep you sucked into the boot camp scheme that they have going on. Um, so that was like, as far as preparedness, like boot camp was just a long waiting period, and before I finally got to like, okay, A school's one step closer. And by the time I get to buds, that's like, all right, then when it's really beginning at that point. Um, I did have like a stress fracture. It was like the first time I ever broke a bone was in A school at some point, just in my foot. And I just basically stayed off of it for a while, recovered, and kept going. And the only other really, there was no other really wear and tear other than just being ground down, um, you know, beaten, tired, and all that. The normal kind of stuff you would expect from that type of physical activity. So I was fresh, ready to go, but also like in a state of, man, is this real life? Because you're where you want to be, and it kind of is. It's a surreal experience because a lot of people never get there along the way as you're going. It's like less and less people have been there, and playing the psychological game with instructors, and that part of it was always like pretty comical to me, because it's like you can see them having fun but also playing the roles they need to play to weed people out. So it was definitely more psychological for people. But if you have the attitude that gets it through, for the most part, you have a twisted, kind of sense of humor, and you can laugh in the pain and the suffering, and maintain a positive attitude even when it's miserable and wet and cold, because at the end of the day, you're alive. You're doing what you want to do. So yeah, that's kind of my state I was in.
Well, it's interesting to hear that you say that the mind games were comical to you, because I want to ask you, what do you think it is? Because all these people that go, like you said, you see less and less the further up kind of the ladders of the rung, the rungs of the ladder that you go, you see less and less people. These people that come in and want to be a SEAL or want to be in the military, or, just accomplish something. Why do you think it is that they get weeded out? I don't think it's just a simple answer like a mind state. I think there goes more to it. Can you kind of talk about that, about people either, stepping away or not accomplishing that goal, and what the difference was for you to accomplish it?
Yeah, I think the difference is they're not really honest with themselves. They think they want to do it and they really don't. And then when they get to the point of realization of like, hey, you're gonna sit in some, you're gonna feel some sucky situations. A lot of this work, when you get down to doing the real work, and once people had that realization with reality, it's like, oh, that was just kind of some wishful thinking, as a romanticized idea of what I wanted to do, and they quit because of that. In some level, I get it. There's many excuses that people have, but unless it's like a physical injury that's unavoidable or something, or that just they couldn't overcome, um, everyone who decides not to be there, decides not to be there. So it's a choice, and it's interesting to see people get weed themselves out. Um, and that's where it was kind of fun, like watching the instructors play and try to mess with you. And we'd have like the rebellious attitude for the most part. You're doing what you're told, but you're also like, you know, fighting the psychology in the suck, like talking shit or whatever. And the people who couldn't handle it just use it to beat themselves up, and then they they left. It's like, hey, if you quit, we'll stop this evolution. We just need one quitter. Come on, we got pizza, we got donuts, we got coffee. You're cold and wet, man. That sucks. All the way from like that kind of negotiating to just the mean, uh, hate everything about you type of instructor personality. Just beat you at every chance they get. There's the good cop bad cop game being played. It's a fun kind of experience, even though you're in it and it's happening to you. And so I enjoyed that side of stuff. Even when it sucked, it was entertaining.
So what's the difference when you leave there and you're there for quite a while, but you leave there, you go to a team. It's the same kind of, you got to put your head down and get it done because you're the new guy. But is there a different look at it? Is there a different approach that you take to it, as in mind state or physical state going into it, just because you're the new guy and you got to prove yourself all over again to this team?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the same. It just you keep chasing the present moment of like you're proving yourself every second, every time. Like it's not just because you pass buds or SQT or work whatever. It's like you got to constantly prove yourself really until you go through at least a couple cycles or like a wartime cycle of a deployment, and then you have some experience. So that's you're usually like humble, quiet. That's the ideal new guys, is to soak things up like a sponge, and obviously operate to your maximum capacity. um, and yeah, really just respect the fact that you're amongst warriors and you're getting um, taken in to a community of that caliber of person. So there's a lot to learn still. It doesn't end, and it just keeps going on. The more experience you get, um, the more the more wisdom you have to share, right? If someone's like brand new, they don't have any wisdom at the end of the day as far as like how things function operationally. Even if you had all the training and you were really good at the training, it's still training at the end of the day. So it's theoretical, really, for to some degree. There's some practical aspect, but where you've been to war or something, now you have experience to draw upon, which is has the potential for wisdom if you can reflect on it and share it. So, um, yeah, as I got to when I went to my second platoon, I spoke a lot more.
Well, and that's what I was just getting ready to ask you was I've talked to a couple of guys on the show that say they weren't great new guys, that they, they weren't necessarily quiet like a sponge sucking everything
Mm.
in. When you get someone like that, is there a way to take that person aside? And I'm talking to you as an older guy. You said as you gain knowledge and you kind of pass it
Yeah.
off. Is there a way to pull those people kind of offline and go, look, man, you're doing it wrong, and approach it in a way that they will look, hey, man, this guy's not trying to break me down. He's trying to help me out. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, but it totally depends on who you're dealing with. You got to figure out, number one, why are they really there? And if someone's just literally, if they're a good dude and they're maybe just being a little cocky, that's fine. You can work with that. But if someone's just like really, you know, buys their own bullshit and thinks they know more than other people, then that's a whole different area. Because if they're not willing to work on themselves and willing to be humble, sometimes there was a guy like that who was like a former SWAT guy who came in through our class, and he got booted in SQT because he wasn't receptive. He's like, no, I know better than you guys. And it's like, I guess not really. See ya. So they just booted him, and there's been times like that. So if someone can be, and most guys can, because they're there for the right reasons. At least when I was in, um, they can really overcome the obstacles of whatever that is, some ego thing at that point. It's like, yo, man, it's like, shut the fuck up and listen for your time here. And later on, you'll have your time to speak, at least that's the general um, way of being. And most people, if you get into a situation where you really don't know, you're naturally going to be quiet. But if you get into a situation where you think you know, then maybe you'll be more chatty. And a lot of people think they know and they don't, and it creates these little conflicts. But I think the more, like, as society has become more narcissistic over the years, right, in general, there's more of that personality trait that has to get dealt with because it's very high ego driven, like, we're the masters of our own, destiny. And it's like, yeah, there is that kind of, but you're also like a speck on God's creation. And if you're not humble and thinking you're the king of the hill, king shit, um, there's a million and two ways to get you back to humility, whether that's through someone's own experience and they're learning lessons the hard way, or if people just have to have a chat and be like, yo, you're not working out with this team environment in this capacity. You can either make a conscious effort to change or you can beat it, and sometimes they bounce people like that to a different platoon and try it out. And sometimes, they get sifted away, but it's rare that someone comes at that level and gets sifted away. Usually if you've gone through all that training to get to that point, things can be reformed. But it's really about talking to the person and getting on, like, understanding where they're at. Why are they acting the way they're acting? And then from there you can formulate a communication strategy that would bring that person's ego and awareness into reality of, like, yo, here's what you're doing. We're a team, we're a platoon, whatever, we're a squad. And now it's not about you, it's about the unit. You're part of that.
Well, it's always, to me, whenever I've talked to you, and we've talked a couple times on the phone and stuff. When I talk to you, you always seem to approach life in almost a Zen fashion. Um, do you think you've always been like that? Do you think that's come with age and wisdom, or do you think that you've always kind of just looked at that and that's the way you've lived your life?
Yeah, it's more that I've been like that since I was a kid, like as far back as I can remember, always kind of like, aware, observant, but also detached from the energy that people get wrapped up into usually. And that was the same in, like, combat. Like, I was always very calm and at peace with where I'm at. It's like, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go, so I'm not worried about that. I'm where I want to be, or where I'm at least, and I'm comfortable with that. And it's just rolling with the punches at that time. It's kind of like sailing in the ocean. You're going to go with where the winds are. You can kind of navigate a little bit and use it to your advantage, but you might have to make some zigzags to get there, because if you fight the wind, you're going to go backwards. That's not smart. So yeah, I was always able to take, like, a big picture view, and I was very stoic just as a kid. Before I didn't read much, and when I started reading, like, Marcus Aurelius and different stoics like that, I'm like, yeah, this is like all shit I already had an understanding of. So it was like cool to read, like, oh, there's other people who had this kind of philosophy back in the day, and some still do, but it wasn't some, like, it was refreshing. It wasn't like groundbreaking. It was like, man, I guess I'm not fucking, and like some alien or something. There's other people who had this way of thinking. So yeah, I've always had it. And think it's one of those things. You come here, there's the nature, the nurture, but there's also, like, the spirit you come in with. And that's, if someone has a very strong will and spirit, it's not going to be changed by any external factors. So that's kind of.
I want to ask you, with that stoicism that you have, does it ever become a problem, or has it ever been a problem, like through training? Because I can tell you, I know a couple guys just like that, but it's not that they're confrontational. It's not that they're standoffish with people. They're just living in kind of their moment. So has there ever been a time where that comes up to be a problem for you?
Not really. I think for the most part, I mean, maybe little bits, but for the most part, because I'm just in that state, very observant and fairly quiet, you know. I'm just soaking up like a sponge. But there are people, who are like, man, this dude's pretty quiet or whatever. So they're trying to like figure you out, because if you're not saying a lot of stuff, if you say little things, then they're trying to really extrapolate. And it's a game of consciousness. And I've always been pretty good at that, whether it's dealing with teachers, professors, people who are older and think they're wiser, not to say that it's not necessarily the case, but I've been told many times as growing up, like, oh, you'll learn when you get older, kid. It's like, yeah, I got older and I didn't learn what you were saying. I realized that I was right the whole time, but it wasn't from a place of like, I'm going to prove someone wrong. It's just, here's what I've observed. I have a strong understanding of it. So when someone says like, yo, man, you're too young, this is gonna be different, I'm like, okay, I'm open to that possibility. We'll see. um, and for the most part, if you're just real and honestly looking at stuff, you're not imposing your ego onto the equation to manifest some belief out of the way something is. You're just seeing it how it is. And so I guess from that perspective, I always have been honest and raw and calling out bullshit, when it would be easier to pretend that um, the lie that's being like believed or taught is true, or the bad decision is a good decision. I'm like, that's a dumb decision. Here's why. Like on my second platoon, I was doing that because we had some chiefs that were, you know, whatever, subpar, I would say, and not anything bad. Like they came from a, a long period of rest, like away from platoon activities. But then because they had positional authority, they wanted to pretend like they knew, instead of drawing back on the tactical experience and leveraging that and making decisions off of that. They're trying to just make erroneous decisions, where it's like, dude, this is not the best way to approach this problem. So I'm going to speak up, because we're not just going to walk into a tactically silly situation just because some person thinks it's better, when they don't have the tactical experience at the end of the day. So it was interesting kind of seeing that most people, for the most part, like experience for a guy in the team would be, they would have that more clout, honestly. But there's a few who like didn't really put in their time, and they to some degree like hid out more administratively, and then try to make up for their own perceived shortcomings, right? So they're projecting a more stronger presence instead of just sitting back and listening and asking questions. So I think that goes into like leadership styles, or real leadership, versus like one of the issues I think the military has, is it thrusts people in leadership positions where maybe they shouldn't be there.
Well, don't you think that's pretty much anywhere, not just the military? I mean, these days, if you can take a test well, or if you can, PowerPoint something very well, you're going to move into that position without really knowing anything. And I think that's a problem in every aspect now.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of the perceived expert, or the titles that someone has, or they got a certain degree or went to college or can speak off of basically a script. They can present a speech or a presentation, and it sounds clean, and then that gives the illusion of what someone knows what they're talking about. Like you could really speak very confidently about making an apple pie, and you're using tomatoes and potatoes and stuff, and someone's like, that's not how you make an apple pie. But if you're just going with it and no one knows, they'll believe you. So I think there's an element of that, like where people feel pressured to pretend like they know what they don't know, in a lot of aspects, to fake it till you make it type of thing. And I think that's seen, yeah, definitely across. It's a human condition. It's a stage of human development where they're not willing to be honest with themselves and just be like, yo, you know what? I don't know. I got some stuff to learn. So I'm going to look to the people who know more and learn from them. There's no shame in being a student, learning even as a leader, because a leader, truly, like that word is a bit misguided in how it's used. Like a leader is looking out for their people. That's the number one thing. Not being like, oh, look at me, I'm out front, I have all this power over you. That's not a leader. someone who has a lot of shit to learn at the end of the day.
So let's talk another word then. Let me give you another word to kind of figure out in today's society: humility.
Yep, big time. Humility is a big one. Um, if you don't have humility, that ego gets out of control, and you really have to, the ultimate humility is realizing that there is one reality, that's God's reality. Everything else is a perception of that reality. And that's where the ego comes in and is like, well, my perception is actually the right one. And then they start mistaking their perception for the reality, right? And if your perception's aligned and it's you're seeing stuff for real, it will be the same or close enough. But if it's not, then people are detached from reality and they're seeing themselves as some like super great respected leader, and meanwhile their guys are like, who is this clown, like what are they doing, but they can't see it, the disconnect there. And that happens again, yeah, everywhere across society. It's more of a stage of human development is how I look at it, because I think everyone goes through some time period of that, and it could be for a moment, it could be for years, when they have that mental sparring match with their own self, like, oh, I know a lot, oh, but maybe I don't, and then some people just double down because they can't handle not knowing, and they just pretend to know. And when it gets to a situation that's very full of friction for whatever reason, like either a complete breakdown or a flare up or something happens where the communication ceases. So that's a big problem, lack of internal and external like communication that jives.
So taking everything that we've talked about with the humility, being the guy that sucks it in, that learns about everything that they need to learn about leadership, all of those different things. Let's talk about you going into combat. Now, I want to bring this up, and I don't want to go too into the weeds about combat stories. I would like to talk a little bit about combat, what's going on, but more than that, I would like to talk about the mental state and what you're seeing and how you're changing as a person. So, going into your first deployment, can we talk about kind of timelines? How much time you're spending over there? How much time in actual combat you're spending over there? And then, if your perceptions changed about your job or what you're doing, I want to hear about those too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So the first deployment it was like a rip. So we did half time in Baghdad and half time in the Asia Pacific. So the first like 3 months of the 6 months was in Baghdad, in and mostly in the red zone, but in and out of the green zone because we were doing detail for Dr. Jafari, who was essentially like the prime minister or whatever at the time. And our job was just like shuffle this dude around to make sure he didn't get, smoked at the end of the day. But it wasn't, I mean, there's bombs and stuff going off. There was rockets, but we really didn't get like direct attacks during that whole time. We had like indirect attacks and the bombs and stuff. And we were just shitting and getting like moving principal from place to place. So we weren't just hanging out. And our posture was very aggressive. So no one really messed with us. There was like one instance where this car, I think it was totally random, but started like driving backwards on the other side of a river at our pace. And that was where I was on the 50 and I was just ready to like, brass out of he had a butterfly trigger there. So he pulled the brass out and I was just like ready to unload if I saw a reason to. And like some of the guys in the car were like, dude, fuck, like shoot. But the like over comms are like, just wait. And I was just me, like, if I see something, I'll shoot. If I don't, as long as I can, if I have a justification, I'll go. If I don't, I'm not going to go. Right. Cause that's a moral philosophical thing. Like I don't take erroneous shots or shots that I second guess. I'm sure of when I pull the trigger. And so in that instance, I didn't. And some of the guys like, man, you should have just shot that guy's car up. And maybe, but nothing happened, like he got out and started fucking with his car and we just kept going. And, it was just kind of interesting having that kind of interaction where you're like right there on the edge, ready to pull the trigger, but you decide not to do it. And there's like some pretty, there's a lot of potential for stuff to happen there. But I was just zoned in looking for all the cues. if I saw an excuse if I saw a reason, a valid reason, even a little one, I would have had no hesitation. But I didn't. So there was no justification for me to take that guy out. Um, and I think that, that's just, again, it's my own philosophical understanding and morality that I had before even going in. Like, if I'm going to take someone's life, right. And that's a big responsibility. It shouldn't be looked at cheaply, no matter who it is. And I never did. And I always, valued my own life and the people I was with, the bros I was with. But during that whole process, like the PSD, like yeah, could SEALs do that job for sure? Could they do it well? Yeah. Is it the best employment of the asset? No. And I don't care who wants to come on and like from a command side and like, oh well, that's what the mission needed. It's like it's using your hammer as a fucking saw. It's stupid. It doesn't make sense. Um, and especially when you get to strategic. So I was like just really reflecting on this. All right, strategically, what's going on here? Tactically, like why is this happening? Why are we doing this type of work? And basically hanging our asses on the line for some dude who's completely replaceable in a foreign government. Like that to me was bullshit, and it's still bullshit to this day. It doesn't matter that we did a good job. So I was reflecting on that, and that's the reason I had opportunity to stay back in country for the rest of the 3 months or rip. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to stay here and do this shit, I'm not going to stay here. Was there a chance I'd go do assaults and stuff? Yeah. But after 3 months of that, I'm like, no, I'm not going to roll the dice to stay here and play this game anymore. So then we ripped and we went to the, like a little Asian area of operation deployment.
Well, a lot of people don't know about that side of the war on terror, where there was a lot of work being done in that Asian kind of area of operation. So, can you speak a little bit about that, breaking off from there, and if it changed any for you once you got there, or if you still saw the same kind of stuff going on?
Yeah, I mean it was nice to not be doing PSD, and it was nice to have that rip on the backside because we're not, if you had it was basically like vacation before you went home almost. Like you're training and stuff, but you've already went to war and you're on the way back. If you were there and still going, you'd be like cranking on the training, just getting ready the whole time. So it was actually like a pressure relief valve in some ways, but in other ways it was still like, you're doing foreign interactions, training, but really it's just like it's presence at the end of the day. And from a relationship aspect, from like big military strategy, it's like, yeah, to keep alliances going at that level, it makes sense why they're we're all over these AOs. But from another perspective, it's like, we got shit to take care of in America. Like sending our best, like biggest fighters, like the men who are going to actually stand up and fight for what is right with the person to the rest, left and right, their family, their lands, and all that stuff. Sending us over to do nation building shit essentially is what will end up being the downfall of this whole thing. And it's all based in a misguided understanding of like what we're here to do as human beings, in my opinion. There's the pursuit of taking and extracting, and there's the duty of defending where you're at, like the nature of the land, the people, the community, the families. That's different. That's a big difference. And that's where I think shit gets twisted in people's heads, because they think that the righteous mission or whatever is to go be proactive in other people's backyards, where at the end of the day you don't live there. So I started looking at or just feeling it. I wasn't even really reflecting at that level at that point. This is more me going back right now. But I could just feel like shit really didn't make sense, and I was still had a bitter taste in my mouth from the whole PSD thing, because again, it's like, yeah, you're a military, you're doing what the command structure is telling you is best, but it's like it's clear that either they don't know what's best in a lot of situations, or they're intentionally doing the wrong thing, and either one is not that good. So I was very highly critical of like these so-called leaders in all aspects, from politics to military chains, and like seeing what people are really about. And what I found is that many people in leadership roles are full of shit, and they're really out for their own career, not out for what is best for defending and making that unit, that team, as effective and cohesive and just clean and efficient as possible. So I started like really becoming slightly disheartened in, not like most of the guys again were solid, but just seeing that in the structure was like, yeah, something's off here. Something's really not right.
So let me ask you then. So with Baghdad out of the way, you go over and you do this little 3 month thing. How much more time until you get back into the United States? And then after you get back into the United States, how much time until you roll back out into combat?
Oh, it's pretty quick. Oh, not combat, but to training cycle. So it's about a year and a half. So workups, and then you're out there in another couple years. But you're on the road, just training nonstop. So you might have like maybe a month's time max to take like some time away, but really less than that for the most part. And then you're back into like a individual level training or a unit level training or something to increase a skill, which is, like that's when I came back, I was able to go to sniper school, which is awesome. That was like the best school that I've, uh, the most educational school, real, honest, like learn something school that I went to, where I'm like, all right, this is how a military school should be. That sniper program was really good, and I it's like one of the things I want to do is SNEAL sniper, So um, I really enjoyed that, and then the workups were fun, but they're intense as far as like time that you're gone, and then you roll right back into a deployment somewhere. And mine was to Rhamadi in 2006 for my second one.
So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So that one was definitely more of the the ideal the ideal situation, which may sound strange to people because most people don't think it's ideal, and not that I want war to be happening, but like if there is one, we were all ready to roll in. And so because we were doing at that point overwatches, like we had different language, basically like sniper missions, direct actions, pretty much every single day, just nonstop. So it was a very high op tempo. We did a lot of work, a lot of basically patrolling everywhere. We'd drive from OP to OP because there's so much IEDs. We'd wait for routes to be clear and go to like a clear route closer to the target and patrol out. So we did a lot of foot patrols. Got a lot of really solid experience on that deployment, and really enjoyed it. So that's one of the reasons I decided, as I was going, like, I was looking at that as like, man, that was a pretty high note to get out on. And the other way I saw things going was that the future deployments may not be exactly like that. They may be more disheartening. So I was going tossing back and forth, like as we were coming back, like what am I gonna do? Am I gonna re-enlist? Am I gonna extend? Because originally I had planned on just staying in for my whole adult life until I retired. But then just seeing these little things caused me to just reflect on, like, is that really what I'm gonna do?
So let's talk about kind of the mental state that you're in, because after talking about that first deployment and it's not quite what you think you signed up for, and of course we talk about being disheartened about it, or maybe it's not the right thing. You do a couple things back stateside, but you go back, like you said, to an ideal situation in every way that you said it was an ideal situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've got kind of two different things warring at you there. You're seeing what you actually trained for, what you wanted to do, what you wanted to be. You've seen the other side of it. In
Yeah,
all,
but even still, it was a fight the whole time. Like, for instance, like FBI was doing, these things called shooter statements, where they're basically like scrutinizing and investigating you in war from having no like experience or in the ground thing. So I was looking at stuff even as it was like a solid deployment. Your own branches of your own people are actively trying to fuck with you, and that is it's not good. Like it's good from a micromanagerial perspective if someone really wants to like put their thumb on people, but it's like you at the end of the day, if you're that way, you don't know how to fucking manage warriors. So you have no business managing us. And I was looking at things like that, like who are these people making these decisions and why do I want to work for them at the end of the day? Because they're not here doing the shit that we're doing and they're trying to scrutinize us and get people, you know, into trouble. It's like if you're gonna play this game, then don't even send us to war at that point. Like pick your battle. It's either go mode or it's we're gonna try to talk this out. So I feel that people who don't actually go and fight are very quick to offer up the fighting force. It's like you know, the stereotypical lady in the bar with the big mouth who gets her boyfriends into fights by talking shit to other guys and saying that her boyfriend's going to beat their ass. That's what I felt like from these so-called leaders. And again, it's not all of them, but there's enough of them in there where it's like, shit, you know, I don't want to work for someone fake. So yeah, jaded my just it just made it enough to where I knew I was like rolling the dice every time. Like maybe it could be an awesome time, you know, with solid dudes, but there's always a chance where you're in some real life situations and some dumb stuff is being made, some dumb decisions. And after like enough reflection on them, I'm like, yeah, I don't need to roll those dice. You know, if it was 100, if it was like 99% or 100% like solid, cool, I'll stick. But other than that, I decided to do extensions, and that's when I went to trade it after I got back from that deployment because I didn't have enough time on the books to like do another full deployment cycle and work up. And because my enlistment would have happened when I was like overseas, so like you got either got to re-enlist or if you do an extension, you can pick where you want to go in training and do that. And that's when I decided to go to assaults, which was good, you know, trade at assaults, and we trained like close quarters combat and urban warfare. Yeah, and I enjoyed that. It was a good like period of transition and waiting point to see like, am I gonna re-enlist or am I gonna get out? So I took that whole like 3 years basically to really sit and deeply contemplate my move because there was nothing else I wanted to do other than, you know, I was a SEAL, so wasn't planning on doing anything else. But now I had to start thinking about, all right, well, if I don't do this, what else am I going to do?
Well, so two questions come to mind though when you say that. Okay. So you do all this training, you decide this is what you want to do. You want to be a SEAL. You just said it right there. That's all you wanted to be. You was a SEAL. You wanted to do your job. So you
Yeah.
go over there, you get, we can say very disheartened from however the situation was, leadership, whatever it may be, the problems that came down. You decide to go to Tradet, not decide to go back into another rotation because you wouldn't have enough time. The first question to it is after all this time, you spend all this time training, all this time to be, we're what, probably 5 years in now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
About, yeah.
yeah. So we'll go 5 years in and you're not who you trained to be. Is there a disconnect there? Is there something that really sours you? Because we've already talked about you having kind of that zen and setting back, but it seems like it would be hard even for you to step away from that, not accomplishing what you really set out to do.
Well, I did, but no, by the second deployment, like I definitely had, as far as like, that was the peak of it, as far as I did get to employ my skills and do what we wanted to do. I would consider a very successful, good deployment. However, there was enough um, structural things, systemic things going on where I'm like, this is more of an anomaly or like you hit a lucky kind of rotation
I,
as opposed to this is how things are going.
Yeah, I guess I should have formed the question a little better. That's what I mean is that you look around and don't see that what you trained to be or what you wanted to do is going to be maybe a huge factor coming up, and to spend the rest of your life, because you got 14, 15 years left,
Yeah,
spend the rest of your
for
life
sure.
doing that. It's got to be a little disheartening.
For sure. Yeah, it was the hardest decision of my life for sure at the time. probably is definitely up there. It's still to this day to be like, man, it's like you're there, you're where you want to be, kind of. I mean, you are, but it's the environment has been shifting or changing, and it's not how it was sold. Like for instance, like the 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 solid pipe hitting warrior guys were seen as a threat basically to the administrative structure, and so guys would be getting in trouble. And I'd watch that. I'm like, well, this is a SEAL team. The SEALs are the weapon at the end of the day. They're the instrument that this whole thing exists for. And you're taking solid guys and and treating them like kids or like babies or less than. And it's like, man, that's where it started to really, like, I just would reflect. I'm like, is like, yeah, there's a bunch of warriors in this culture, but again, it's the administrative side where it's like there's where the disconnect is. And at the end of the day, they're they have the um positional authority to make decisions in that are not that are not grounded in any form of reality or making the force effective. And so when I look at that, I'm like, that's a gamble that I don't want to take, as far as why should I let someone who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about dictate to how I'm supposed to be acting in the environment they're telling me to go perform a task, or us as a group. Like, I don't think it didn't seem to me like to be a wise decision to continue on that path. And so I made the hard decision of saying like, well, guess I'm going to get out, and I didn't have any plan for it because I never, you know, I wasn't in there for like money or career aspirations or any of this shit. I was there to do the job, and they just made that not an environment for, not welcoming basically for people who actually want to do the job. I mean, you could stay there and do it. Plenty of guys stayed in, but I guess you could say I was ahead of my time because there's a lot of guys since who realized that, and some guys wrote some really good stuff. And as far as like just an internal paper that was circulating around that I'm thinking of, where it was like called "The Death of the Teams." People who have read it know what that is, and yeah, I was like, exactly, that's exactly it. So people were feeling the cultural shift, and it goes into simple things like um, they're always trying to get like a woman SEAL or something, right? Like as if that's something that matters whatsoever to the effectiveness of a SEAL team, right? Or a platoon or anything. And yet the administrative side is so hell bent on getting it that they're willing to change standards. They're willing to fuck with the people who are in that system, who are the ideal people, to try to get this imaginary fictitious character that doesn't exist into a position so they can have their check in the box. And so when I looked at that, it's like, okay, is this really a war fighting warrior force? Or is it that? Because those two things are mutually exclusive. They don't coexist at the same time. So I decided like, yeah, while this is a warrior culture, the administrative side is pulling us into a whole different direction where it is exploiting that energy when they want to, and then punishing guys for being what you need them to be in other situations where it gets to like they lack an understanding, like PTS, TBI, and how they discipline people when things manifest in a certain way. So, I was still I can communicate about it very clearly right now in reflection, but even at the time, like I could just feel that shit was just not right. So I wouldn't have maybe said it like this back then.
Well, the last question to that, because I told you I had two for it, leaving that and going into trade debt seems almost like a fool's errand going into trade debt, because now you are part of that machine. So you're taking all those ideas. So how do you do it? How do you go to trade debt, train the way you know you're supposed to, but still follow the guidelines that are being spoon fed to you?
Because we had like full control of it, especially coming off of war. Like we shifted from dynamic clearance to combat clearance against the previous trade regime, I guess you could call it, where they were like dynamic, 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 everything fast. It's like, bro, there's like, IEDs. There's situations where it doesn't make sense to do that. So, we literally just came back from this theater. You guys are talking theoretical training. It's like you should probably listen to the people there. Fortunately, it was a shift and we just made the changes. So it was a very good program while we were there because we were training like you need to be fighting in the war. So actually that was a very good experience, and all the head shed was very supportive in that structure, and they let us really run the training how it needed to be run. So it was actually, yeah, it was a very, it was still a high point as far as like we were able to act how we were supposed to act, to fill the capacity of an instructor to get people trained up as best as proficiently as possible. So I actually had a good time at TradeEt, and it was assault. So you're doing CQC and urban warfare, and so it's fun too.
Okay. So as you come to the end of your career and you get out, you said you had no plan because you were going to do this for the rest of your life. So you come to this, and I noticed that you talk a lot about this now, like you said, maybe not back then, but you talk a lot about it. And we mentioned it a little in your introduction that when people step out of the military and that transition, especially in the kind of environment that you were in, um, there's a tough transition period and there's no stepping stones. There's no one to kind of show them the way because maybe they were going to do that forever or maybe they were going to do it for a short period of time, but there's nothing like what they were doing. So as you get out, what happens to you to get you to start thinking that?
Oh man, I was just going with the flow. Like, I'm gonna get out, gonna go through these process. Went through TAPS or whatever it was called, where they kind of do these little tests and tell you about kind of some programs, but it wasn't super. Like I didn't really understand my options, so I didn't maximally benefit from how I could have. If I would have been more strategic and stuff, like I could have started using the GI Bill and stuff right out the gate, and done some things. But I'm like, well, shit, if I'm gonna not have a paycheck, I better figure out how to get a paycheck first. So I'm like, well, I'll just go try selling cars or something at a car dealership. So I went and like got an application during my terminal leave and was like working while I was on leave just to have something set up. And I did that for a couple months and then realized, yeah, this is not the type of life for me. Like slinging new cars on a lot is kind of soulless. Some people like it, I guess, but um, it was like 6.5 days a week, 7 days one week, 6 days the next, from 7 to 7, and you're getting like $100 a new car unless you hit these quotas. And then like I sold a used car once and I made like $5,000 on a used car. I'm like, well, this is way better of a of a of a decision to sell used cars. And like I can just do this on my own, like buying and selling stuff off of Craigslist. So then I like quit that job and did that and started going to school at that time. But I didn't know exactly what. I just like, well, I might as well use the GI Bill. So I'm going to go to City College and just start taking courses and figure it out as I go. And eventually like figured out a path through there. And it was it was a cool experience. Confirmed a lot of stuff that I already knew about the education system, but I also maximally leveraged it because I was coming off the backside of a military career, so I'm literally just absorbing everything that I can.
Okay, so let's talk about a quote from you. You said the biggest thing I've noticed about trauma and people going through the process of healing is that the strongest medicine is just being around other people.
Yeah.
So let's talk
sure.
about you and that quote in particular and what you did when you got out to do that kind of stuff.
It took me a time to get there. It definitely didn't happen immediately. Like I was, you know, um, buying and selling cars off of Craigslist, doing contracts here and there, some overseas, some stateside, shooting stuff. Started buying boats at some point, and doing the same thing with cars, and just really like wandered into certain jobs and out of certain jobs because they just, you know, I was balancing the paycheck. Like you just got to do something to get a paycheck versus like your life should be fulfilling and you should be doing something that you really uh, is aligned with who you are as a person. Like you're doing your highest purpose. And in all those situations, I was not doing them. I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I knew that because I could feel that it wasn't right. So I, my instinct, my intuition always guided me away from the things that were not true. And we used to drink, we hang out, we'd continue that military pattern of doing things. And eventually, like, my buddy Rob, who we were roommates, and he ended up killing himself while we were roommates, and some other people were there, and most of us all were asleep, and that was a whole like super surreal moment, because it's not like we were other friends and people we knew had killed themselves at this point, but it doesn't make it any less intense or real, especially when you never think that that's going to be the thing, especially when your bro's like all super happy and stuff, and having a good time for the most part, and like a positive being. And then it's like, damn, this interaction just happened and there's no reverse button. And I remember even when that happened, I was like, I didn't believe it for like, I don't know how long it was, like, but at least like 30 seconds of time where I'm like, oh, this is going to be some kind of prank. That was my first thoughts, but then it's also like the reality is coming in. It's like, oh, what if it's actually not a prank? And then you're like, oh, it's definitely not a prank. And then it's like reality, hits. So that caused like a point of a period of deep reflection, where it's obviously like I stopped going to school. I started this business, with co-founded this company that was like technology and financial technology, and very a wazoo idea that manifested into a reality from some hard work. And I just like cut away from everything because I'm just like, you're going through like soul searching type of experience, I guess.
Well, let me ask you, with your roommate, you said you never saw it coming. He was a happy guy and stuff like that. So, do you ever find out? Do you ever get down to kind of the bottom of it and figure out what it was that shifted things for them? Because you said you'd seen it before, but obviously the signs weren't there with this one.
Yeah, and we'd like seen it before, as in like other people had killed themselves, but I hadn't been intimately involved in their journey up to that point. So that's what I mean there. And then as far as like why, it's you don't want to pretend to like have all the answers, but there is a general environment that creates that outcome. So it's while the person going through it has their reasons and their specific life experiences that cause them to, struggle in such a way where they would do that. It's actually the environment that is allowing that to happen. And part of that environment is not having proper release valves. When someone is struggling with this stuff, like, people don't know how to communicate and have like real deep philosophical conversations, and that can get into a whole myriad of things. Like, some people just ask themselves why something happened or why something didn't happen, or did I make the right decision, or you can get into like moral injury stuff, and it can go very, very broad, because it's not just a lot of the West, the science looks at things as like it's a mental thing or a brain chemical imbalance that manifests this thought pattern that's off baseline. It's like, it's none of that shit. Those are symptoms, and the real trauma is perhaps it's mental, perhaps it's emotional, perhaps it's spiritual, right? And then of course physical ones are pretty obvious, but when it comes to spirituality and like an understanding of that stuff, this machine, this system doesn't have it. It's industrialized the war process, and because of that, that's where I was always feeling that disconnect between like warrior class and like industrialized machinery thing. Like, there's no heart in an industrialized machinery. Warriors are full of heart. That's why warriors show up and fight to the fucking death for what they believe in, what they know is right for their family, for their people, their lands. That's a whole different animal. It's a whole different beast than a machine that is very efficient at doing things. And I kept examining like this reality, and you go into these periods of reflection, and each time, if you come back more centered with just an expanded awareness, and like, if you're feeling anger, rage, sadness, whatever during those moments, when you feel through those moments and you sit with it and you don't run away from them or chase it down with a bottle of alcohol or something, then you actually heal from those things. But however, if you're masking the symptoms with pharmaceutical pills that they give you because it changes your brain chemical structure and they think it's like treating depression or something, and then it leads to suicidal ideation. The problem there is that Western medicine believes that it's this chemical formulaic thing that you can figure out, as opposed to talking to the fucking human being and understanding why someone is struggling or why someone is exhibiting certain behaviors, because there's a conscious reason for it somewhere in there. It could be subconscious, but it can be identified in conversation, and that type of amount of work, the machine, it's not economical, so they're not going to invest that time. Really, they're trying to get as fast as they can to identify a diagnosis that they can match to a substance, and they go, here's the fix, as opposed to being like, well, no, the fix is like really understanding, why are we doing something, why are we here, like, what's the purpose, what's the end goal, like, is this a series of forever wars as it has been, or are you really trying to win some shit? Because are you really trying to end this, like a just war, and a good it's not even like an effective war campaign is very quick, should be short, because you don't want to draw this out, because everyone in that process is suffering in some capacity, especially families and stuff. So the longer a war drags on, the more detrimental the effect on the total population, regardless of who wins or doesn't win. If it just fizzles out like Iraq and Afghanistan and merges into a new one like in Ukraine, it's like the common theme there is constant stimulus. And then the question is, for what purpose? Is like, is it the is there the threat that's going on? Perhaps. Is there a whole shitload of corruption in that system that's claiming the threat? Perhaps. So is it as black and white as it's shown on TV? Definitely not. So when you really start reflecting on things, and again, I just look at who are the so-called leaders when you get up the chain and like beyond military and into now the civilian side of things, where it's like commanders and chiefs or the staff and all that stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, none of those guys typically really go into combat, and they're the ones that are making these so-called decisions. And I just really saw there aren't really any warriors in the administrative structure, just like there aren't really any medical um, experts, truly tacticians, people who treat people in the medical administrative field, right? Or you could go to any studies, you get these more academic, theoretical people in managerial positions, and theory and practice is not the same thing. Practice, experience, again, wisdom only comes from experience, it doesn't come from theoretical belief systems. So we have a significant lack of experience leading bodies of people into situations, whether they be war, whether they be business, whether they, like these economic games that are being played. And it's blind leading the blind in some cases, or it's lions led by dogs in other cases, right? Where it's like this whole administrative paper tiger system. And it's not just the military, it's across the board that I see it and saw it.
So, what makes yours is healing through nature? That's what you came to in all of your setting
Yeah.
back, reflecting on this, figuring it out. So, if I can play devil's advocate for a minute, what makes
Mhm.
yours different? Why is yours better? Why is it a better way to lead these people through this healing through nature, purposeful living, than it is the way it's been being done?
Because it's empowerment. It's taking someone in their natural raw state, in their natural raw environment, and saying like, yo, you're going to sit here and be very present with yourself, and you have all the tools necessary to handle this situation. And it's not necessarily like we don't have some brief and we tell someone that, but it's through the experience, the process of someone sitting with themselves, going through whatever they need to go through in a natural setting with no artificial stuff, filler, whether that's pills, whether that's like grid line streets, like all these things that are or artificial foods, like all these things that are disconnecting people from the reality that exists, creates issues that need to be addressed down the line. And those issues, if not addressed, lead to cognitive dissonance in thinking, and where people can really believe that they're fighting or on the side of something that is like, man, if we just can accomplish this thing, then everything's going to be better. And that goes into like political movements and all this stuff where it's like basically outsourcing responsibility and accountability. And so this process is like, no, there is no one you're going to vote for. There is no one else that you're going to have come and solve these problems for you. You're going to sit here, you're going to do some hard work. You're going to, be amongst other peer group people, accomplishing tasks, accomplishing objectives. Those little wins start to build up in your system. Like you recognize you're working with your hands. Maybe it's moving rocks, to make, to fix an erosion point or something. Like it's manual labor. It's honest work. You're exerting yourself, and you don't have time to sit and wallow in sorrow where you can still feel it and process it, but you're doing something productive. So you're retraining, you're reframing the perspectives you have on things over some period of time, and tapping into an awareness of that, like you're not the traumas and stuff that you're experiencing, right? If someone's in a state of extreme depression or something, yeah, that's hard. That's a hard thing to deal with, but it's also like that's not you. That's not what you're destined to for the rest of your life. That's something that you have to feel through in this moment. And it's like when you're going through a dark tunnel, don't just keep going, because there is a light. Eventually, you're going through hell, keep going. It's that type of mentality where, and it goes back to buds too, like the people who quit, like it got to a point of hellaciousness where they decided like, all right, this is enough. I can't, the light at the end of the tunnel is too far away or I can't see it, so I'm just going to turn around and go back this way. And I think it's that general nature to not want to face reality, sit in the present moment. And so the human psyche in some cases chooses to go a different direction, and you know um the work isn't done. Like it's like when you have when you have something you're supposed to do, especially like as a man, you can speak, but it's all human beings. It's like if you said you're supposed to do something, or you're supposed to do something and you don't do it, it weighs on you, because you're like, that's your honor at the end of the day. For like, man, I told someone I was going to do it and I didn't do it. You start beating yourself up. Or if I told myself I was going to do it and I didn't do it, people start going these negative ways of thought. And so by having like, regardless, wipe that slate or keep that slate, and let's just get little wins by dig a hole, move a rock, plant a thing, disconnect, reconnect, tap into stuff that is created by God, right? The natural environment. No one has a patent on that stuff. There's no pharmaceutical person. There's no expert psychotherapist or whether that's going to come with a theory. You're just going to have a realization in the mountains, in the forest, on a farm, whatever, amongst peers, in a way that's not a funeral. That's not something negative, because that's another issue, is like when people gather back together, oftentimes for military, it's like, damn, we should really hang out when it's not a funeral. That's often the conversation. And so this is part of that too. Is like, yo, let's get together for no other reason than to get together, have a good, like, have some food, have some chats, maybe do some hiking, do some work, get back to life. And now you're creating positive synergistic experiences where people are benefiting each other by benefiting themselves, and people can suffer in silence together, go through their own shit when it needs to. There's a lot of healing that happens when no words are being spoken, but everyone's doing something together. And that's what makes this different, is that it's taken the skill sets that make veterans, especially special warfare, like the small unit camaraderie tactics, ability to just get something done, even if you don't know how to do it. It's like we'll figure it out and we'll work on it until we get it done, because that's what humans do. We have creative capacity. We have the capacity to work together. Those are like two human superpowers that no other animal has on this earth, no other being that I know of, maybe Bigfoot or something. But we are uniquely capable of that. And just getting together and people experiencing and seeing that is inspirational to some level, even if it's really small. And that's all you need. It's like a little momentum, one step forward, one foot in front of the other. The snowball rolls downhill and it gets a life of its own. And before you know it, instead of, you know, someone having suicidal thoughts or then they're like creating a new passion company or something and just putting all their energy into that, or being a really good father or mother or whatever it happens to be for the veteran or person that we're talking about. Because trauma is not isolated to veterans. It's just, you know, war tends to um, create intense periods of trauma for people to deal with. And so in some respects, like, veterans are a leading edge population of dealing with stuff.
So I want to ask one more question, kind of as a devil's advocate, because I've heard you talk about it and I know where you go with it, but I want you to explain it to people that are listening. People will look at that and say, well, they're out there, they're having to face it. What if they can't handle what they're facing? They don't have professional help, like we've talked about on here, any of those kind of things. They just are facing that reality. What happens when it goes wrong?
So specify, so like someone's sitting by themselves basically in their own energy and they're just really spiraling downward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number one is to, like, and it comes in a point of reflection before you're in that state, or as you're, if you're listening and you're kind of in that state, to realize that number one, other people in your situation have been there before, have been in those, not exactly the same state, but in similar states where they're dealing with maybe extreme depression or something, some kind of mental, emotional, spiritual state. And, you know, there have been people who have sat through, gotten better. So it is possible, even though when it feels helpless, to know that it's not hopeless. That's just like, it's always darkest before it's light. So there is that point at which it's going to feel maximally like hopeless. However, going back to that thing, like, you're going through hell, keep going. And it doesn't mean like avoid or numb out. It means sit with it, reflect on it, feel it, process it. Like, if you got to cry, you know, because if you're holding in tears, which men typically do, but if you have a real reason to cry, you know, if like your homie dies or something, that's a valid reason to shed some tears. It's a version of prayer. And so if people aren't allowing themselves to release that energy in the form of crying or whatever, yelling, something, then it stays inside and they carry it with them. That emotional energy manifests, because it's always like someone's tea kettle is like ready to burst, you know, or the more that energy is built up. It's important to acknowledge that, to recognize like, yeah, it sucks, but you're going to sit through the suck and you're going to assess like, what can I do? And if it's unbearable, number one, contact a buddy, contact a friend, doesn't matter, reach out, call. I got a call the other day from a bro and he's like, man, I'm really struggling. We just sat and had a chat, you know, no big deal. He's like, man, I feel, you know, however. I'm like, dude, there's no excuse. Like, thanks for calling. I'm glad that you did, you know, it takes a strong character to make that call and ask for help, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, because we all have periods when we could use some help. That's another benefit of being a human. On the other side of it, when someone needs your help and you're able to give it, that's a version of it's a blessing, right? Because you're able to provide support for someone in their time of need. And if it's a peer type situation where you have a similar background, that's a sacred role, because not everyone can relate. Like, not every, you know, it's one of the problems with combat stuff, because if people haven't been in combat, they're not going to have that peer understanding. So it's either going to be a judgy perspective of like therapists are trying to figure out what's wrong, or just a no frame of reference perspective. And that's where I don't think it's therapists or doctors or people who are going to get these degrees to try to understand shit. It's like, it's the people who have been through it, who have had the experiential knowledge, which is wisdom again, to actually sit and have a conversation, listen to where someone's at, and then offer guidance, advice, not say like, hey, you're gonna do X, Y, and Z. And say, hey, I've been in a similar state. There's a couple forks in the road. Here's one avenue. Here's maybe the avenue they're going to push you to. I don't find that very valuable. I think it's quite destructive when it gets into pharmaceuticals. Or here's some of these other paths that are more natural, communal, tribal. We're coming from team units, which are very small. That's a tribal environment. And then you're going into civilization where, at the average company or something, there's no common cultural thread that binds people together. It's just they're all there for a paycheck, and maybe they also kind of like the company or what it's doing, but at the end of the day, there's no real higher purpose beyond making that paycheck. And when there's like in the military, you're not getting paid that great. I mean, it's whatever, but you're there, number one, for a purpose, and that purpose is important because you have a meaning for existing. We don't just exist by accident, even though some people in their headiness and in their academic attempts to understand the nature of reality and consciousness and all that stuff, they try to say like, oh, it's just a big accident. We're all just here and blah, blah, blah. It's like, when you drill down into that, it's very obviously not true. And no one actually does believe it. That's why there's conflict when it gets to depth of conversation around that stuff. And if you do reflect and you say, I am here. Why am I here? If you know why you're here, your life is, even when you're going through tough times, like, you deal with it. If like you're like, we have a young daughter, 4 months old. Like, if she's going through some stuff, our purpose is to be there to help her through it. So even as much as it may suck or be, affect you negatively, you're there for a higher purpose. Another human being is depending on you. Same thing in the team setting. Like, you have other people there, so your shit that you have to deal with, you're not going to allow it to negatively impact the other people. When you get pulled out of that environment, isolated, and you can sit in your own thoughts for a long period of time, that's when people can get trapped and feel like, well, now no one does depend on me, no one does care, so we're going to seek an exit from this situation. And that's when it's it's it becomes very obvious that community prevents that crisis from happening. Therefore, community is the medicine that needs to be put back together. And that's what Guardian Grange is about reconnecting people in communities for a positive thing. Or as Buckminster Fuller said, it's like, if you put your time and energy as much as it was to like create weaponry, and you created livingery in it, the world's going to be a pretty awesome place pretty soon. And that's one of the philosophies that we're expanding upon, is the livingery. Like, taking these us being like tools of weaponry, we have these skills that don't really apply in the civilian marketplace as it exists right now, but they actually do, because when you take it to like your deployability and your ability as SEALs or whatever to go and like spend time outdoors with minimal requirements and gather observational data and report and do work, like, that directly applies to environmental restoration. That directly applies to farming. Like, maybe you need to pick up some new skills, but then that becomes fun. Like, you're going to learn about animal husbandry. You're going to learn about soil science. You're going to learn about water management. You're going to learn about these living systems. And spiritually, there's a good, like, to have that balance of nurturing life. If you've come from a profession of dealing death, or where that's part of it, it's my understanding, my knowingness of it is like, you take the opposite energy and you incorporate that to create a balance, right? If your mind is like just racing, someone got to have a deep hearted connection. So again, like, someone having a child, that may create it, right? Or someone having a fucking going out in the woods for enough time, and then they really realize like how beautiful it is just being alive, and they let go of a lot of the self beating, the beating of the self up, mentally. And it's like, man, I'm just lucky to be alive, to be sitting in like a forest with all these mountains in that natural beautified setting where no human beings built it. Like it's not an
Well,
invention of man, it's an invention of God.
and
Creation.
I think that's a big thing with you is that what I take from everything that we've talked about is this nature thing is because there's not someone directly over you telling you what to do that doesn't understand it. It's you and understanding the world that you're in. Now, in Guardian Grange, I want to talk about that. I looked up the definition. Guardian, a defender, protector, keeper. Grange is a country house with farm buildings attached. So,
Yeah.
it's everything that we've talked about so far, the guardian mentality, even the house with the farm equipment and farm buildings around it is building that community
Hmm.
over and over, and then you being the defender of that grange, of that farm, of that community, along with the other people that are working with you. But let's talk about, you have three main reasons for Guardian Grange. Can we talk about the three main reasons?
Yeah, for sure. So it's, there's the community health reason, right? The cohesiveness, the fact that society has been, it's very obvious, divided amongst each other, right? So there's that lack of communication, which creates a schizophrenic society at the end of the day. If people can't talk to each other, it's not that much different than your brain not being able to talk to each other. So if you lack communication, there's a division that happens. And the more strong that division is, the harder it becomes. It's like tension on a knot. That knot has to be eased and slacked and untied in order to not be a knot in there anymore. And so that's one of the big sides of it. Um, the other one is the individual, like the veterans health, and really individuals health, but the veterans mental, spiritual, emotional, physical too, health, but physical we have a better understanding of. The mental, spiritual, and emotional side, not so much. And so really getting someone to a balanced state within their mind, body, spirit, emotions, so we're not just efficient, but compassionate, understanding, tapped into our intuition and our instincts, and able to critically think, observe, and assess and become aware of a situation unclouded by emotional states. So that's uh that's another one. And then the environment is the environment being, like, where's your food coming from, where's your water coming from, what's in that stuff. City water is toxic. It's pretty gross. And it's not good. Or a lot of processed food, it's malnourishing. It's lacking nourishment, and it's toxic, and that stuff builds up in the physical body and creates these like diseased states, number one, in the human, and number two, like the environment itself. Like if you're a forest, you walk into a forest and it's a nice big biodiverse amalgamation of life that's cooperatively working together, even though like a wolf may eat a deer or something, right? The deer and the wolves, they're not at war with each other. That's a natural exchange in a cycle of life. um, and so while there is life and death going on, it's cooperatively working to make that whole living ecosystem stronger. um, and really tapping humans back into our what I consider the highest role, which is human beings as a steward of our environments. So our local natural environments is one of those. Our bodies is also an environment. So taking care of ourselves as best as we can, and making sure, like, we're cleaning stuff up. We're managing our food, our natural food systems properly, so they're not tilling the soil, and then the soil's losing nutrients over time, and now we're at this point where the the stuff that's being grown doesn't have the same nutrient profiles that existed like 100 years ago. Or the animals, because there's pesticides, are having you know chemicals stored in their fat, and it's little trace amounts, but that stuff over time builds up. So point being is, like, to be conscious of, like, hey, that just because stuff's going on and it's somewhat working economically, kind of, but not really, just because it's happening that way, we need to really assess, like, are we making the best decisions in the moment, not for the whole world, because you can't manage anything outside of your domain. Like I always say, or like to point out, that a deer in California, in whatever, San Diego or something, is running around its little range. It's not that much. It's like so many miles, and they have no care, or they have no idea what's going on with a deer in New Hampshire, and vice versa. But humans, because we can be aware of stuff that's happening far away, and you can create an emotional attachment to it, people tend to be very bold with, like, oh, we're going to save the world, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we got to vote this person or campaign for something or X, Y, whatever. It's like, or my thing is like, you can just focus where you're at and make your little piece as awesome as it can be. And if a whole bunch of us are doing that, then we are having an effect, a net effect, but we're doing it with maximal impact, because again, I can't do anything about what's going on in Georgia, whatever that may be. I can do something about what's happening around my house, my community, and our tribe, and we can inspire each other because we have bonds with people we know, as opposed to like social media's been great about this, as far as like taking people away from their own families, their own friends, their own, and feeling like they have a more of a connection to whatever influencers or figures on a screen, when they don't even have the full picture. So they get like basically a romanticized or a jaded view, and they tend to stick with someone who's romanticized, right, and discount people who they feel is not jiving with them. But had they had a full true relationship, they'd see the more whole human being. And that's when you get into situations where someone can have a preconceived notion about a type of person, and just by hanging around each other, the stereotypes get bypassed. Like in the military, it's very good for that for a lot of people, because it's a melting pot. People come together, but it's like, yo, here's a task, this is our primary objective, so that other stuff falls to the wayside for long enough to people to see each other as human beings, and not some identity, some race, some this, that, the other, whatever identity people want to attach to how they see someone else as anything other than a human being, creation of the creator. And
Well,
at the end of the
I
day, like
call it,
a good child.
yeah, I call it Facebook perfect, and that's where a lot
Yeah.
of people are at. Is they don't see what all went into that. They just see the end results, the perfectness or the whatever it may be, and it's a big problem with Guardian Grange. You have a couple different things that are going on, projects, but I want to talk about the Escondido microgrange first, and then we'll move into the pollinator preserve and then the food forest,
Yeah.
about some stuff that's coming up. So, can you talk about the Escondido, what it's doing, and what it's making available in that area?
Yeah, so Escondido, it's down in obviously San Diego area, which is a lot of veterans. So it's really like the doorway. It's a space where vets can come, and like we've had events, and we're having one on the 8th too, where they can get some acupuncture, some massage, do some yoga, hang out, eat, chat about the bigger kind of vision and how people can get involved in other projects. But it's also a proving ground. Like Robert Sweetman, who's been out there for a while, just like it gave him a great break to reflect on where he was at in his life and kind of reset and really start taking care of himself. And man, he's like crushing it. And he's been, really feeling the energy, taking it, and like moving forward. Like he's the one who set up this event, like the Calm Down Bro on the 8th and the last one we did. And so it's cool to see it getting a life of its own. But that property is like a little, it's a 2-acre place, so there's only so much we can do. It's more of like garden, it's proof of concept, and that's why I call it a micro grange, because that grange is again the farm with many different outbuildings. So not every building, it's like if you have a processing area, you have a garden, you have a pasture with cows, like you could have that all in one place. Or you might just have like, yo, property down there has got some cows, other side of town, we can process, we got some gardens over here. So basically, that's serving as like a gathering place, a space to to do work, to conceptualize, visualize, and do some of the gardening stuff. But it's definitely like it's a doorway in that area. And then I'm up more in Ojai, and we're working on establishing some, more like the food forest, working and rehabilitating the land, to optimize it for regenerative food production locally, and feeding. And like some of our partners are working with like chakra chai, which is an Ayurvedic drink, is to create to fulfill the supply line with the projects we're at. So we're working towards things like that where, yeah, we're a nonprofit, but my intention and goal is to get it to the point where donations are always welcome and it's cool, but where we don't depend on it, where we're producing our own revenues and providing opportunity for whether it's someone for a job or whatever to push this mission forward. So it's when I say like a regeneration network, it's like, well, what is regeneration? Regenerative agriculture is describing the fact that it's a circular input, just like a forest. It's like our human input in there is to manage that system so the natural processes work and don't rely on external inputs. As far as your own self, it's like uh, spiritual regeneration, right? Rebirth, renewal, having expanded awareness that move you from, a state of focused kind of anxiety or depression or something where it's like hyper focused into being able to release that. That is a regenerative experience too, because now you're becoming more of yourself. Those emotional states aren't controlling your actions, or really like influencing so much. So that's all I got to say about that, I guess, for now.
Well, let's talk about the pollinator preserve real quick too, and then I want to talk about some of the, because we went over it, but we didn't really go into it. We need to talk about some of the expenses. This doesn't come for free. You talked about people being able to donate money and things like that, but you have things like a collapsed well, debris cleanup, site cuts, all those kind of things. So first, let's talk about the pollinator preserve, what your idea was behind that, and then let's talk about the expenses that going into setting this up.
Yeah, for sure. So the pollinator project, it's a collaborative effort with the Ola over there with of the Neiman Shell Ranch, and they had this beautiful 200-acre property out there, and part of that mission was to increase pollinator plants to create the space for monarchs. And that's the one that catches a lot of the attention. But those pollinators to come in and do their thing, because when pollinators, again, it's a natural system, it's cooperative. You need all of the little beings to do their part. And so if you bump up pollinators, then your life in that area is going to be more rich, more wealthy. And so that was a way of like seeing a problem. Hey, there used to be a lot of monarchs in that area, now there's a lot less. Whatever the reasons are, like one of them is like if you have their food sources, the plants that they like to be around, it's going to be a more healthy environment. And when you have more of the bugs that are supposed to be there, the animals that are supposed to be there, the plants that are supposed to be there, it becomes healthy. So that was, hey, it's an opportunity for us to go do some work, get that thing started. And yeah, it was cool that NBC did an article on it and wrote about it. It was very well received, because at the end of the day, it's an honest way of doing things, and it's a humble way of like, hey, we're going to do some work. How are we going to really create this healing environment? Are we going to look for a substance? Are we going to try to just talk ad nauseum, or are we just going to put our heads down and like get some stuff done and come to realizations through that work and develop strong, productive, meaningful relationships?
So let's talk about some of the expenses with it. We've talked about what it does for the community, what it does for veterans, but it's not free. And so I want people to understand with donations, and we'll talk about the membership plans a little bit and things like that. But first off, let's talk about expenses. And when you go into a site like the Micro Grange, when you go into a site like the Food Forest, what it entails and what kind of expenses come behind it.
Yeah, I mean, so number one, we're blessed to have like our sweat equity, right? You have the ability to invest finances into something, you also have the ability to just get down and dig. And so we have been growing through a lot of sweat equity, and we're blessed to have like a general contractor guy with some equipment as part of our team. That's Joe, and he has a wealth of experience. And we're able to actually get a lot of work done. Like we've done at least like 100, if you were paying a construction outfit like 100 grand to do some of the stuff we've done already. And that's really cool to have that the capacity to do work um, for for the good of doing the work, like not for getting a profit on the backside. Not that there's necessarily something wrong with making a profit for your work, but some of this stuff isn't actually profitable, which is why I have you know this solution as far as the environmental side set up as a nonprofit. Because if you're trying to if you're leading with profit as the motivator and something's not profitable, that means it's not going to get done right. Whereas if your goal is to get shit done right and it's not profitable, you're still going to take the hit to get it done right, because you're actually investing in other forms of capital. Like your financial capital may be going down, but oh damn, your soil's really healthy and now you're growing produce, or you got enough chickens that are producing eggs and you're getting a return in other things. And for sure you could sell those eggs and produce and extract a financial return. But the establishment of living systems and living infrastructure, living capital, expanding upon that is really what makes the soil-based economy a thing. Like I say it as a word that I created to describe like this broader structure beyond even the nonprofit. It's like what the nonprofit is helping to plant the seeds of, but it's a different way of perceiving and acknowledging where value comes from. Because a lot of people right now, they'll see like, what is value? It's a price, like a number in a bank account. But you can't eat your bank account, you can't eat your money, you can't eat your gold or silver or crypto or anything like that. So when it comes down to like your hierarchy of needs, if the system is like very abundant, like it has been for a while, um, people don't, they tend to take it for granted. And when a squeeze comes, or when the system stops working as it has been, and people try to hang on to value, like, oh, what's the cost of a gallon of milk or whatever? It's like, well, at the end of the day, like if you're in the desert, you're starving, that gallon of milk, I drink raw milk, it's like $20 a gallon, but I do it for a reason, because it's good. And at the end of the day, it's like that nourishment and the positive effects it has on your life is so much more than you can measure in the dollars. So I'll always um, default to making the best decision as I can, whether it's for my own body's environment or the environment that I'm around, to create a healthy, balanced ecosystem. And that's kind of the whole, we're able to prioritize that. And we're able to, when it comes to cost, it's like, okay, well, we need like X amount for this well to get it done. Cool. But in the meantime, we're still like making progress at it. We're still getting stuff done, because we know we need to get what's done right. Yeah. Would money, capital infusion help get some stuff done efficiently? Sure. Of course. But regardless, we're doing this work. Like we're committed to doing the work. Um, whether it's like materials for tools, garden boxes, training, whatever, we're running a pretty tight ship, because we're a young organization. Like we're not even 2 years old, really. 2020 is when we started, and we're in of October of when we got our letter back. I was seeding the idea before then, but that's when we were officially like existing as a nonprofit. And so it's been less than 2 years, and it's been during COVID, a lot of challenging time for a lot of things. But because we're literally able to sweat and bleed and pay towards this vision with those uh, items, and we have a little bit of financial help from like donors and stuff, it's been cool. But I'm definitely ready to like pour some more gasoline in the engine and accelerate, because now we have enough proof of concept. We know kind of where the 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 issues are, or things to tighten, to mend. Like one thing I've been going on a lot is like actually creating the community structure, like the systems that people can step into with having no outside knowledge, and start to understand what it's like to work as part of a team in a different aspect. So I'm really I've been spending a lot of this 2 years on, like, number one, just getting this grassroots work done, doing a little bit of, we haven't even done a proper fundraiser. It's just been all word of mouth and like connections that we've had who want to support because they see that it's real. We have a solid understanding of, like, all right, it's got energy to it. People are really down. They're understanding, and it's filling these gaps where a lot of people have talked about building like their whatever utopian kind of society. It's not that, but it's a acknowledgement of, like, there's a better way of doing things, and to a degree, like, we came away from it, like 20 years ago there wasn't that many big box stores, right? There wasn't all the Targets and
Right.
Walmart super centers, and there was a lot more mom and pop shops. There was a lot more small family farms. And so that diversity, that lack of centralization, it was much more decentralized, and your communities were healthier and richer for it. And so that's what working on going back to, using veterans as the vehicle to pollinate this system around the nation eventually. But we're starting, like, where our highest population density is, and the amount of capital potential assistance to really help seed this system and take this cellular systemic structure. And I know I can take, like, if I can do it with 8 people here, 4 people here, or 10 people here, we can replicate that over here. And by creating leadership within these cells, instead of, like, waiting for some centralized command structure to dictate down, like, what you
Right.
should be doing in Idaho, people know instinctively, intuitively, and from their own experience what they need to do. Or we get together and, like, chat, like, hey, how do we tackle this problem? Let's all focus on what's going on Jarn's farm in Iowa. Man, he's running into these issues. How would we solve it? Oh, maybe let's take a crew out there and do some work, help drive some fences or whatever, like, help share the
Right.
load for people who are trying to do this, like, farmstead kind of lifestyle. Can it be done? Yeah, but it's a lot better when you have a community of like-hearted
Absolutely.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's talk about. I know that the money's not a big thing to you, but I think that people that aren't close to you but could maybe help out. Let's talk about the membership plans. You have a freemium, an all access membership, a community supporter, and then a lifetime founding member. If we can talk about those to kind of wrap up this conversation about how people can help you.
Yeah, so that you're talking about the community section, which I still consider it in beta, and we're using it for a lot of, like, internal stuff. But basically, that's the network, one of the network portions of it, where we can come and collaborate on projects. I'm going to be leveraging it more in the future for like getting groups together so they can work on uh, an educational component, or a problem solving component, or just communications, to really build the community side of this. So that membership was to kind of seed it, so it's freely accessible to everyone. And if people want to support the Guardian Grange model through a membership there, like, as we turn on different courses, or different educational components, people who have, like, these other levels get access to that as we create it. But it's still very young and it's in beta, so it's people who are buying into the vision at that aspect and want to support it in that capacity. It helps out. And we're still exploring that platform that's being used, and I'm potentially going to get an app, have an app created. I got to just test some stuff out, and basically I'm trying to make it really easy for people to stay engaged, because it is a concept that's not being done. So it takes many touch points and experiences and new learning opportunities to really, number one, see that this is possible. It's not some fairy tale, like, good idea of, we're not talking about utopian shit. We're talking about just real, honest, present assessment of work that needs to be done, and the humble capacity to do that work, and reflecting and understanding the fact that we are the leaders. As if it's 8 of us in a community and we have the presence of mind that we need to improve it, you're the leader at that point. So time to get to work, time to, like, rally support if support can be rallied, and if not, it's like, head down, do the work. And help grow this organization with that intention, that knowing the right people will show up, and they have been and will continue to, and the ones who don't really see value in it, or don't understand the value, they're going to continue doing whatever they're doing, and that's fine. But it's really building new structures that are, it's not like invented any new shit. It's just like reframing natural systems, and patterning operations off of natural systems, so that this network is built from the ground up with an anti-fragile framework. So as it expands and grows, like as a tree gets bigger, it doesn't get weaker, it gets stronger. Like a redwood's very strong,
Right.
sapling's not so strong. But in the corporate side of things, when you get a bigger corporation, it tends to get more fragile. The communication is less efficient, there's more friction, and it all comes down from basically the pyramid model, where you have your top, your CEO, and your C levels all the way down, and there's like a micromanagement, there's a loss of communication, instead of like how mycelium works or how root systems work, how your blood cells work. If you get a cut, like you don't have to tell your blood, hey, make a scab on my arm and stop the bleeding. It just knows what to do. You're like, damn, thanks blood, I didn't die because you like did what you're supposed to do, good job. So that's more of the structure, is getting in the concept of or in the reality of like a butterfly. When it changes from a caterpillar into a butterfly, it liquefies and becomes, it goes from one state, liquefies, goes to another, and there's this cell called that imaginal cell, which has all the potential for what the butterfly becomes. The butterfly only becomes a butterfly if that cell is like healthy and intact and does that thing. So that's the same kind of framework we're doing. Like our smallest cell has to be fully capable and healthy, and until it's that way, we don't expand it, because you can't expand. Once it is
Right.
fully capable and healthy, now you have some redundancy in there, and it's like cell division. You have one cell, it turns to two, so you have the resources to feed the other cell. Boom, you get another 8 people, and you can do that in an area, you could do that across a region, across a nation. But of course, we're creating this stuff where we're at right now. And I'm from originally New Hampshire. Like, vets are from all over the place, so I look at this as like the skeleton of this body that's being built, because it's not going to just be us. However, we can set the example and are, from the way of like we're dealing with trauma, we're tip of the spear again in that regard,
Right.
and then leveraging that energy to do good work, and to use our creative capacity and our ability to work in community to get done what needs to get done by any means necessary. And it's positive, it's cool, and it's a creative process. It's dirty, it's like not super well polished, but it's real and it's raw, and it's a natural thing that's growing. So I'm proud of where we've come from, and where we're at, and where we're going.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing about everything that you just said is you're talking about it's only as strong as the weakest link, but if you make every link as strong as the other, there's no way that it can do but succeed. So
Yeah, and
let's
it
go
yeah.
ahead. Go
No, I
ahead.
was just gonna say, and so like if you're looking at like the footprints you leave behind on a trail or something, right? Imagine if like every footprint you leave behind, there's new life just growing and flourishing, and it's like, oh wow, when these people come into town or come into an area, things get better.
Right.
Like that's what I'm talking. That's the energy that we're putting into things.
Well, of course, guardiangrange.org is a place that you can be found where we talked about a lot of the stuff, the community, it gives the mission, it gives the projects, everything like that. Are there other places, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, that people can find you, learn more about this project?
Yeah, we have Instagram's probably the most active. There's a Twitter page, there's a Facebook page, but they're less. We're not really doing stuff on there. We will as we turn it on. And everyone's wearing a lot of hats. I don't have time to manage a lot of medias, and Instagram seems to be the most engaging. We also have a TikTok one that I personally haven't been on, but Robert's been managing that, and we'll probably do some more. Leverage these mediums, or these mediums of exchange, as best we can. Another thing is like we're working on a documentary / or docu-series to help tell the story, right? Because the story is is one of the most powerful tools that we have as human beings to communicate, like, well, what is this really about? What's going on? What's the vision? So I'm excited to have a solid team, and it's still early days of that, but we have a funding strategy for that too mapped out, where we're going to approach businesses and be like, hey, if you want to help us make this documentary, throw some change at it, you're going to get some good press out of it. So, and it's a write-off, you can do sponsorship. So that's kind of the model that we're going to spin and present, and leverage the capacity to really like help people see really what this is about. Cause it's a passion beyond, it's a necessary thing, but I have a real creative passion for it. Like, I can see the vision, I can see it out 20 years where it's going. And we're here still planting these seeds and tweaking things to get our foundation really solid. Because if you have a solid foundation and you grow from there, things are gonna be good. But if you have a shaky or unstable foundation, you're growing too fast, and there's going to be breakage down the line. So I've been really, you know, not pulling the reins back, but being very cautious to not force anything, to allow the divine timing to play itself out. And it's really interesting, like the types of people who have come and encircled this idea and this vision, and started contributing and being supportive of it in many ways. So it's cool. It's some real stuff. And as far as like walking with purpose, I know even when it's, I'm working way more than I would like to work, as far as just like doing way more administrative shit than I want, and
Right.
doing all that stuff. However, there's a purpose to it. It's for our like my kids, our kids, like the future, like long after we're going to be here. And I feel great about it. I feel solid, even though we're still at a state where we're grinding. It's still a
Right.
grind, but
Yeah.
we're getting it done.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the state of the world right now, especially coming
Mhm.
through where you did it through COVID and everything. So I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it's a fresh approach to not only alternative therapy for these guys that are having trouble kind of coming back into society, but it's great to just look at the future and what this is going to be able to provide when it stretches all the way across the United States from coast to coast. You're doing a fantastic job. You have an amazing message, and I'm so thankful that you came on the show. Is there any last thing that you want to promote before we kind of end this?
Yeah, so we talked, I think, before the podcast started, about Ryan Parrott and the Human
Hmm.
Performance Project and the Seven
Absolutely.
X, which we're a part of. And yeah, they're doing, we're having a really cool um, event in 2023, which is going to be 7 base jumps, or jumps out of airplanes, or base jumps, 7 marathons and 7 plunges in 7 days on 7 continents. And so we're making this whole um, spectacle of it, but also like the processes to learn and to document and to put out the real gouge on like optimizing performance and recovery for everyone. And a big part of that is focusing on, like, there's too many suicides still to this day. And so it's attacking that from another angle too, which is like, if you're focused on human performance, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual, all of it, like getting into balance and operating at your highest capacity, that's what that project is about. And we got, some of the best base jumpers in the world as part of that project, a super awesome team, medical professionals, people who really are top notch in their space to put this project together, which is a logistical crazy challenge. And I'm not really on that logistical side, but I know, and I'm blessed to be part of that project, and we are a beneficiary of it. So definitely go check that out. And then as far as like, some of these other modalities of healing, I'm blessed to also be a member of Church of the People for Creating Mother Earth, which is down on the res, and we do native ceremonies, and sweats, and work with different ways of healing together, for veterans, MMA fighters, football players, all kinds of people have been coming through that gathering of no strings attached. It's like you just show up, you go through these processes, and that's it. There's no money exchange. There's no nothing. It's a really honest way of gathering together. So I just came up from there today. Drove 4 hours down last night, 4 hours back today, because there's some real stuff there, and that goes into beyond the personal, familial, community healing. There's also like a cultural healing, because there's some long-standing stuff, right, that has been affecting people, and it goes back to some of the same issues we're dealing with now when it comes into water and food and all this stuff. Like, it's been going on for a long time, so
Right.
it's good to sit with human beings and connect at that level as fathers, as friends and community members, and really have a purposeful, meaningful, kind of reflective period of time. So I wanted to give a shout out there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it, man. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, you're doing amazing things. We'll make sure that we get the stuff with Ryan Parrott onto your episode page and let him know everything that's going on with that. Guys, I think that's going to be it for tonight. If you want more of me, you can always find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast, and you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations are in video form. If you want to go check us out, though, at the one-stop shop, the DTDpodcast.net is going to be it. It's got audio, it's got video, it's got each person's own episode page with pictures of their past, pictures of the present, and pictures of what they're thinking about doing in the future, plus all their links. You'll be able to find out everything that you want to find out about Mark, whether that be links or just looking into his past. Also, don't forget, go to our sponsor, Police Coffee, at policecoffee.com. It's an officer-owned business dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends, and they're shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant. Don't forget, though, their specialty coffees don't miss on flavor, and you'll find out once you drink it. But the most important cause, and the thing we come back to every week, is they give 50% of their profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. And when you go there and you make your order, DJK10 will give you 10% off your order. PoliceCoffee.com, DJK10 for your 10% off. That's going to be it, guys. Thank you so much for coming by. That's Mark. I'm DJ. We'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll see you later.